Hi, I'm Danny with BuyTwoWayRadios.com. We've done several introductory videos on the Motorola DTR600 and DTR700 digital two-way radios. Now, we're going to go more in depth and show you how to program these radios using Motorola's free CPS PC programming software. In this video, we'll install and set up the software, connect the radio to our laptop, read from the radio and create a profile in the software, create contacts and groups, write the profile back to the radio, then we'll go back and discuss some of the features that are configurable using the software. Ready? Let's get started. First, let's talk about prerequisites, what you're going to need in order to program your DTR600 or 700 radios from the PC. First, obviously, you're going to need one or preferably more DTR600 or 700 radios. But you're also going to need a Motorola programming cable. The programming cable has a micro USB connector on one end that plugs into the charger base for the radios, then a USB port or USB plug on the other end that connects to your PC or laptop. This part number is PMKN4154A. And you're going to need this specific part. It looks like you could use a standard micro USB cable, but don't be fooled. It will not work. We've tried it. It doesn't work. You have to have the Motorola proprietary cable. Also of note, there's a switch box on that cable. Be sure for the DTR series radios that you are set to the digital side. So it's a toggle switch. One side is analog, one side is digital. Be sure that you're on digital. Okay, now that you've got the cable, you've got the radios, we've now got to get the software. So what you're going to need is the Motorola CPS programming software, and that's downloadable from the Motorola website. To find it, you want to go to MotorolaSolutions.com and pull up their DTR600 or DTR700 radio page. Once you're on the page, you'll go to the Resources tab, and the software is available for download right there. Be sure that you get at least version 7.0. At the time we're recording this, 7.0 is the latest, but 7.0 is the version where they added support for the DTR600 and DTR700 radios, so you have to have at least that version. If you happen to have an older version, you'll need to uninstall it and install version 7. Once you have downloaded the software, which I have here on the desktop, you're going to run the setup program. This is going to operate just like anything else that you've ever installed. There's nothing crazy here. It just installs the application on your PC. While this is running, it's important to note also that you don't have to program the radios in this way to use the DTR600 and 700 radios. They'll work right out of the box. They are pre-configured for 18 channels, and they'll work just like standard radios with high quality digital sound right out of the box. I'm going to next through these initial screens. But what we're going to do in this video is go in detail and program some of the advanced functions of these radios. We're going to set up contacts, we're going to set up groups. There we go, the installation is started. This takes around 5 minutes, at least on the laptop I'm using here. So we'll be back once this is finished. Okay, that completes the installation. I'm going to select the yes, I want to run Business Radio CPS now. Just save me a click, but you'll notice it put an icon on the desktop behind me that I could use in the future. This software does run in a web browser, so if you use Chrome or Firefox or Edge, it's going to launch in the browser that you use. So you can see here it's launched. We have version 7, and the next step will be to create a profile. To begin the process of creating a profile, first we go to the Radio tab at the top of the software window here. What a profile does is basically hold the settings for your radio or for your group of radios for your company. So you have a couple of options for how to start with the profile. You can click Read Radio here, and that will download the current profile off of one of your radios. So if you don't have your profile saved, or you want to start with the default, the way it's built into the radio, you can click the Read Radio button and everything will be loaded from there. Clicking New Profile, however, is how we're going to start. First, you have to choose which type of radio. The CLS or CLP programming software works with many different types of Motorola radios, so we have to tell it that we're going to use a DTR600 or DTR700. And for this example, we're going to use DTR600. And now it's going to build a blank or default profile. All the settings are going to be the same as the radio right out of the box. See, we have 18 channels, just like we bought a brand new radio. In order to start setting up contacts and groups, I thought it would make the most sense to provide an example of a company that shows several examples of how channels might be set up or how contacts might be used in many organizations. Yours may be more simple than this, but the example that I've created will allow us to do several things. So the first thing you need to do when you're building your profile is decide what contacts you need, what groups you need. Do you need those groups to be public or private? So I think the best way to start is by creating a chart that lists all of your radios in your organization and maybe put them into a group that looks like an org chart. I've made one here for a sample manufacturing company, and in this org structure we see, keep in mind this is a list of radios, not necessarily a list of individuals. In the example that I have here, we have Janet, who is an operations manager, and Grant is a production manager. Under Grant there are 3 radios assigned to Station 1, Station 2, Station 3. These radios aren't going to have individual names because this manufacturing company runs 24 hours a day and there's several different employees at these stations at various times. So we're going to give them generic names, Station 1, 2, and 3. On the other side we have Michelle, the warehouse manager. Under Michelle we will have radios for Nelson and Jeff, who work in the warehouse. Moving on to the next slide, you can sort of see how I've decided to break this company up into radio groups. We're going to have a group for the production, we're going to have a group for the warehouse, and we're going to have a third group that is for the managers. And I'm going to have the production and warehouse groups be public so that anyone can listen in on those channels. But the managers group is going to be private, so you have to be a member of that group, or your radio has to be a member of that group in order to listen to any conversation that's happening within that group. Okay, now that you kind of have an overview of where we're going, let's look back at the software and I'll show you how we're going to set this up. All right, let's go back to the software and look at how we're going to set up these groups and these private contacts. First of all, As you see on the main basic view of the software, you don't really have a lot of options as far as configuring your channels, and there's no place to enter private groups or private contacts. What we have to do is click the Switch to Advanced button at the top to get more detail. The privates area here, this is where you want to create an entry for every radio or for every private group that's going to be in your system. So let's start by adding a radio. We're going to add the radio for Janet, who is our operations manager. We'll name it Janet. And the ID field is critical. Every radio in your system has an ID built in, and you can just type that ID in, or you can also click this Read Private ID from Radio button. And that's what I'm going to do since I have a radio connected to my PC right now. I'm going to click this to pull the ID straight in from that radio. And this is the easiest way to do it. If you have several radios, or you have 20, 30 radios, instead of typing each one in and pulling up each radio, you would just switch one, switch the charger out, or switch the radio out that's in the connected charger. Okay, I have the ID in, I have the radio named Janet, and I'm saving. I'm going to quickly do the same thing for the other contacts here, but I'm just going to make up an ID for everyone else. All right, we have all of our radios entered into the privates section. Now, for demo purposes, I made up an ID for all but one of these radios. You're going to need to be sure that the ID matches the radio that you're entering here. If the ID doesn't match, then it's not going to work. So you can get that ID by, like I said, putting the radio in the charger and clicking Read, or you can read it out of the menu using the Info button on the radio itself. Now I'm going to create a private contact for the manager group. This group is going to be special. It's going to be our only private group. All the other two groups are going to be public. So private groups require a mapping to an individual private there. So we'll say manager group as the name, and I'm going to, on this one you do have to make up an ID since there's not an actual radio that's going to be the manager group radio. So we'll give it an ID of 100, and then your ID numbers have to be 11 characters and have to start with a non-zero. So I'm just going to fill in 1s and 0s to begin and click OK. Perfect. Now we have a contact called Manager Group, and we'll add in the private group section a group called Manager Group. And we'll choose, notice the ID here. It won't allow me to call it that because I already have a contact with that name. So I'll name this private group Managers, and then notice the ID. We'll have to choose, it's defaulted to the one I selected for the manager group, but you can choose, you see the others are listed as well. In this group, I'm going to add Grant, Janet, and Michelle. I'll click Add, and then you click OK, and you'll see that the managers group is now listed. The public groups section here is pre-configured for the 18 channels that the radio is set for, so there's no need to change anything in public groups. If you needed more than 18 channels, 18 public channels on the radio, you could add them in here, but for our scenario we don't need to make any changes to the public groups. Now I'm going to go back to the basic view, and we're going to change a few of the channels on the main channel list. So I click switch to basic, and now we'll scroll down to the channel list. What I'm going to do is take channel 1 and I'm going to click on it and rename it to production. And everything else is going to stay the same. It's going to keep its mode of profile ID, which is basically that means public channel. And then channel 2, we're going to change to warehouse. Now channel 3 is going to be called manager. And for channel 3, we're going to select that we want that to be a private group. And it defaults to managers as the private group because that's the only private group that we have in the system. You could click the drop down and select a different one if you had more. All of the other channels are going to stay the same, although there are some options here if you wanted to get more advanced. For example, if we were going to give this radio to station 1, for example, we had the option to add a channel that was a direct call to Grant, the manager. So that's one option that you have. You can add a different channel for every single radio if you wanted, up to the maximum number of channels a radio supports. So this configuration basically allows us to set up the sample organization that we created. We now have channels for private groups. We have channels, public channels for production and warehouse. So it's that simple. If we wanted to write this to the radio right now, we could do that by clicking the Write to Radio button at the top. But there's a few important settings that we probably should look at before we write to the radio. First of all, profile ID. Profile ID being 0000 as the default means that any of these radios that you take out of the box will automatically talk to one another on the default channel. So it's probably a good idea, if you're creating the software for your radio, to change the profile ID to any other number other than 0000. That's going to help ensure that your conversation is private. Let's say you have another business right next door and they decide to purchase DTR radios as well. If they're on the same profile ID as you, they will be able to interact with your radios. They'll be able to hear what you say as long as they're on the same channel. So what you want to do is choose a different profile ID. And it can be anything. Just pick a number between 0000 and 9999. We're going to say 2222. Now it's going to ask me, it's going to say that I've changed the profile ID and it needs to reset the channel. That is fine. Just click OK. We don't lose any of our programming when we do that. After you've set up the profile ID, you may want to take a look at customizing the programmable button on the side of the radio. This is the button on the very bottom on the left side of the radio. If you're looking directly at it, you can, right out of the box, this is set to private reply, which means that if you get a call, if you're on channel 1 and let's say Grant makes a call to you, you can press the private reply button and then your call would go directly to Grant instead of to the entire channel. And that's a very useful feature, and most likely you're going to want to keep that programmable button set to private reply. But that doesn't sound like something you're ever going to use. You could also set that button to be a direct call to a specific contact. You could also make that button be call all or page all. What both of those options do is allow you to make a call to every one of your radios regardless of the channel that they're set to. And the difference is call all allows anyone to reply to everyone after they've made the call. Page all is sort of one way. It won't allow you to reply to a page. You can also set the programmable button to mute, or you can disable it entirely. Another thing you may want to do is customize the radio name. If you want to name the radio something for your company, that's common. The radio name field allows you to change the name that appears on the home screen of the radio. You can put your company name in here, or you may want to tick this box here that says radio name based on private name. When you check this box, it'll check the radio ID and pull the name of the radio from the contacts list that we set up in the advanced screen. So for example, Grant's radio will say Grant on the home screen if this box is checked. One other feature we need to look at before we write to the radio is home channel. In our example, we had a production group, and let's say we want the members of that production group to always be on the production channel. We could set production as that home channel for those radios. And what that means is if they get a call from another channel, if they get a direct call, if they accidentally change the channel, it's always going to switch back to their home channel when they turn the radio on, or when there's inactivity for 6 seconds. That covers what I'm considering to be the most important features of the radio. We'll show you later in the video how to customize some of the other features, but since they don't apply to most people, we're going to move that to the end. For now, let's move on to the next step, which is going to be writing to the radio and showing you how it works. All right, now that our profile is set up, we're ready to write this data to the radio. But first, we're going to need to save it. Save it to the system. That way, we know we can pull it back up later or make any changes if we need to. So we'll use the Save As button right here. And you see I've saved a couple of test profiles before, but we'll call this by two-way radios, and save. Now this is going to be listed in the profile section over here on the left, so if we ever need to open it again, we can click right there to retrieve it. Now in order to write the data to the radio, I have a radio sitting beside my PC. The USB cable from Motorola is connected. The radio is on and in the charger. So I'm going to press the Write to Radio button, and then we'll wait as the radio is updated. And it's finished. Now let's take a look at the radio, and I'll show you how some of the changes we made to the profile look in the radio itself. Okay, taking a look at the radio here, let's first turn it on. After a quick boot up, you can see the name Motorola here. This is the radio name that we configured in the settings. Production is the name of the channel. And you can see if we use the arrow key here, we can scroll up and see channel 2 is warehouse, channel 3 is manager, Channel 4 is Grant, which we made a direct contact. It's channel 4. And we left the other channels 5 through 18 in as default. So if we keep scrolling, you'll see 5, 6, 7, 8, and on up. So we still have those default channels here. If we press the P2 key, which refers to the contact tab here, we'll get a list of all of the contacts that we set up earlier. First we have the managers private group, and then we have every radio that we entered. Now if I wanted to do a direct call to this radio, I could just press the push to talk button on the side right now and call station 3 directly. One other thing I'd like to show you is in this info tab here, we'll press the P1 key to get to it. Here you can see the radio ID. When we were programming earlier, we had the software read the radio ID directly from the radio, but you can also use that info screen to get the radio ID if you don't want to read it directly every time. That's a quick look at the radio, and we'll go back to the software and I'll go through some of the advanced settings that we skipped earlier. Okay, let's take a look at some of the other settings that are available in the software here. I'm just going to kind of roll through this list and briefly describe each one, but first I want to point out the help button up here in the corner. The help isn't super helpful on a lot of these features, but it does give a good overview. So if you're doing this yourself later, note that you can click on most of these features or at least hover over it, and it'll show you a brief description of what they do over on the side. So that is kind of helpful. We'll start with code plug password. What that does is allow you to set a password that will have to be entered before the radio can be read in the future. So if you consider your programming very sensitive, you don't want someone to be able to take one of your radios and read it, you can set a password and then they'll have to enter it before they're able to read that radio in the future. This is there are other radio dealers that use this feature often when they want to kind of lock you into going with them in the future so that other dealers can't get your programming. But we don't do that at buy2wayradios.com. Enable restore factory default. This allows you from the radio to reset it. So it's probably not something that you want to allow if you're going through the trouble of using the CPS to program the radios. Cloning mode allows you to over the air clone certain settings from one radio to the other. There's a battery save and a power save mode. Battery save, I'm not sure exactly what it changes, but it claims to add 20% to your battery life, and it is on by default. Power save mode disables backlighting, and it disables vibrate, and it is off by default. You can enable vibrate here, which means whenever you receive a call, your radio will vibrate. There's a timer. There's several timers here. Backlight. There's a transmit timeout timer. Let's see. Group hang time and private hang time are useful. These, once you receive a call from a channel that you're not currently on, or if, let's say you receive an all call, you have a certain number of seconds that you can press the talk button to reply before that radio switches back to its normal standard channel. So these settings allow you to adjust those timeouts. So if you find that you don't have enough time to reply, here's where you might go in to adjust that. Under the audio settings section, you can adjust the microphone gain. That's from the radio directly. And then there's a specific option for accessory microphone gain. This is if you're using an earpiece. And you can choose low, medium, or high for the gain. This would allow you to adjust if you're in an area where there's a lot of background noise. maybe and you're using hands-free equipment, you can set the sensitivity for the hands-free option to kick in. And then the next few settings allow you to adjust the volume of certain tones, and by default they're lower than the radio volume, which is nice. Generally you're going to want the voice to be louder than a beep that comes through from certain functions. There are also several tones that you can enable when you turn the radio on, when you press the keypad, when you receive a transmission, or when a transmission is over. Enable internal PTT with accessory. This would allow you to use the radio's PTT instead of the accessories push to talk when transmitting, so that's kind of useful. That kind of concludes running through the settings and the programming. Keep in mind, if you buy these radios from us at buy2wayradios.com, we will do the programming for you for free. You could, if you've done it yourself through the software, you can send us the file and we'll write it to the radios so that they're already pre-programmed when you receive them. If you tell us how you want things to be set up, we can do that for you, and it'll all be done before you receive the radios. So that's really all there is to it. That's our tutorial. If you have any questions on the DTR600 or DTR700 two-way radios, don't hesitate to give us a call, email us, or enter our live chat at buy2wayradios.com. I'm Danny, and thanks for watching.